Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's stream. Thank you all very much for deciding to spend your Thursday night with us. My name is Paul, and I am your host, as always, for this lovely event. We've got a really good one for you tonight. I'm not going to say too much about it because you'll get to see what Andrew has put together very shortly. But yes, it's definitely going to be an entertaining night. Andrew, of course, is here with us in the chat, and he will be here after the presentation for questions. So if you have any questions that you think of during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will keep an eye for them all. And then whenever we get to the questions, I will pass them on to Andrew. Without further ado, we're going to get things going. I can see we've got a few people here. I can see Alex is here, Bilal, Hamid. Yeah, welcome one and all. So yeah, without further ado, let's get things started and I will hand you over to Andrew.
Hello everyone, so my name is Andrew Shelshire and I'm going to talk about how to make your game cooler. As a game designer, I want to make money designing games so that I don't starve. And my assertion here is that I should make the game cooler. So as a game designer, I want to make cool games so that people spend money on those games and I don't starve. Right. So let me quickly examine my assumptions here. I'm saying that making a game cooler is going to help it make more money. But really that's just a shorthand for making a game something that is worthy of being obsessed over. Something that people can really delve into, get stuck into, write academic papers over. People could replay it many, many times. People can do speedruns of it. People can analyze it and discover new things all the time. They talk about it with their friends. They do cosplay of it. So something that is worthy of being obsessed over. To get to that point, to have a game that lets you do all of that kind of stuff, it has to have some kind of novelty to it. It must be in some way new. It must be deep. It's got to have more layers, and not everything is on the surface. There's some stuff that you have to dig for, and you are rewarded for digging for it. And to get a wide accessibility, it must be a confident kind of game, so that newcomers aren't put off, so that you feel like you're in good hands and you're being guided through where you need to be guided through, and it understands when you don't. So if you feel like your game so far isn't new, or it isn't deep, or it isn't yet confident, then maybe we can make it cooler. As a game designer, I want new, deep, confident ideas so that my game is cooler and people spend money on them and I don't starve. Right, okay, good. But my ideas suck. I'm not great at coming up with ideas. I mean, I've had ideas, but they were disappointing. There's a concept by a YouTuber by the name of Zay Frank many years ago, brain crack. And it reflects pretty well my experience with having ideas, which is I get an idea and before I start doing anything about that idea, I let it accumulate in my head for a long time because I procrastinate. And so this idea becomes better and better in my head. I add more details to it. It becomes really exciting until it becomes this wonderful idea that's almost difficult to explain because it just encompasses so much and it's so nice. But when I go to write it down or try to explain it to someone, it disappoints. It feels like it's missing stuff. There are obvious flaws with it that didn't appear in my head when I was building up on it. And that's because it's accumulated brain crack. It's felt so good and so perfect and beautiful in my head that no matter what, inevitably it's going to be a disappointment when it comes down. And this isn't just true for games. It's for writing. It's for if I were to try and make music, I get this idea for a music, I write this little section in my head, I go down to write the rest of it and it just doesn't come together in that same way. And it means that I feel bad when I actually do try to write down the idea and try to get it out, which is disappointing. But it can be fixed. So the thing is with really new ideas, and the ideas that have been accumulating brain crack especially, is that they're delicate. They need help. They probably aren't going to work out, but you have to give them every possible chance. And it's a low percentage game. So how do we come up with new ideas and develop those ideas so to give them the best chance of success? And the problem here is that everything has been invented, right? And so it kind of feels pointless. It's hard to come up with new ideas when everything's already been done. And most of the ideas that you come up will have already been done. But I'm going to make a controversial assertion that most things have not been invented. That there are more cool ideas out there than there are even people able to implement them. So if we could spend all our time implementing excellent, really excellent, cool ideas, all of the computer game developers in the world, and we still wouldn't tap into the well of possibilities that exists out there. Everyone in the world could do so. There are more cool ideas out there than there are atoms in the universe. That's my hypothesis, and I'm not being metaphorical. How can I demonstrate this? Okay, try saying a brand new sentence. How often would you say that you do say a brand new sentence? One that's never been said before by anyone. Because I attach my own name to it, it's very possible the other two words have never been said together either. One of them being very uncommon. So with a random sentence of 20 words, and given that there are about 20,000 to 40,000 words in English, just a complete set of random 20 words, that's 20,000 to the power of 20, which is about 10 to the power of 86. And there are about 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the universe. So it's easy to create a 20-word selection of stuff that of just random words that contains every possible 20-word sentence that exists, and there'd be 10 to the 86 of those, which is kind of interesting to think about. That contains every summary that you could do in 20 words or less is just on that list. I like the idea that you could sort of look through that list and discover everything that's all of the ideas that are encapsulatable in 20 words, and of course, then it's a process of discovery. You're not inventing something new, you're just discovering it. And I kind of like that idea. But, of course, there's not really 10 to the 86 sensible 20-word sentences in the world. It's more like the number of sensible sentences where the words actually follow each other and it's grammatically correct and so on is much lower. But it's beyond the scope of what I'm saying here to explore all of those, but it's probably about only about 10 to the power of 22, which is still vastly more than we could imagine coming up with. So these are kind of trivial points in a way, but what I'm getting at here is that ideas can be created, and all ideas are eventually created by combining things. You take building blocks like words, notes, code, pixels, game mechanics, and you can combine them. For 13 years, I worked for Canon in their research and development branch, and every engineer had to produce one patent per year. So I ended up producing about 12 patents over the 13 years. And a very typical workflow for that was, first of all, you do have to know your field. You do have to be an expert in the kind of camera stuff that your color or imaging or whatever you happen to be working in the field of. You have to know the prior art reasonably well. So as game designers or as game players, you do want to be able to play the gamut of games that are out there if you want to come up with new ideas in games. And then you just take two bits of prior art and you try to smush them together into something useful. And if it does produce something useful, and it's not trivial to do, if it's hard work, if you smush those two things together, this image processing technique and this imaging processing technique combined together, producing something that manipulates an image in a really interesting and new kind of way, does something tremendously useful, and is not easy to do. It's not just A plus B, but A plus B plus work, then that's a patent. And I'm going to posit that many ideas that come from the fundamentals of stuff that's not all that interesting or new are combinations of things that takes a bit of work to do correctly and to make it work. And that is how you come up with new ideas. So as a game designer, I want a whole lot of ideas that I can try smooshing together so that I get new things for my game and then the game is cool, and the game makes lots of money, and I don't starve. So, brainstorming is a good way, I've found, of generating this big idea pool that you can smoosh together and produce things that you can then prototype or create synopsis or sketches or whatever it is that you're trying to create for your particular aspect of the game. I find it useful with brainstorming to it's a tool for idea generation, and I find it useful to split into two sessions. First of all, you do divergence, where you try to come up with a whole bunch of individual ideas, and then in a separate second session, you do convergence, where you try to narrow those ideas down to ones that you're actually going to experiment with, develop further, try to push into a prototype or a sketch or whatever it is that you're working on. So as a game designer, I now want to run a successful brainstorming session so that we get useful ideas out of it, and some end up in the game, and then the game is cool, and the game makes lots of money, and I don't starve. All right, so with brainstorming, it's not going to be just one monolithic process that you run at the beginning of your game or at a session in the game when there's difficulties. You can run it at different scales. You can run big brainstorming sessions with lots of people at the beginning to try and get everybody's input into what kind of game you're going to make. Or it could be to solve a specific problem when you're into the game. Maybe the game doesn't have enough depth and you just want to expand out the mechanics a little bit more. Or, there's an issue in the game. It's not working the way that you want it to. So how can you find ways out of this? With the brainstorming sessions, I found it really important to explain to all of the participants, especially ones who've never done brainstorming before, how the sessions are going to work, because people can run into trouble when you do brainstorming in an unstructured kind of way. And that's because it's a really difficult thing to expose your creative self to other people, to bring forward ideas and then have them knocked down, which can happen in an unstructured brainstorming thing, especially with engineers who are very good at noticing problems with stuff. And there's a real potential for ego damage in the other people's criticism shutting people down. And you want everybody to be feeling free and talking and expressing, because the brainstorming sessions are about colliding ideas with other ideas, and ideas sparking off other ideas is a really excellent way to do it, so that when someone hears a thing and they're thinking of a different thing, then they might suddenly combine those two and you get that little magic of a really cool spark of idea. So when you're doing a brainstorming session, the participants need psychological safety, and if you organize brainstorming correctly, then it's up to you to provide that safety. So in the divergence session, the job of the group is to generate a whole bunch of ideas. And I thoroughly recommend sticking to a 45-minute session, because divergence is often very brain draining. It takes a lot of energy to come up with ideas and to be sort of sparking off each other, depending on the person. But for a lot of engineers especially, there is that level of interaction with other people often comes at a draining kind of cost. I'm speaking for myself, really. So you start off with whatever your current situation is in the current problem statement, and then you state that problem statement, and then you invite people to expand off in all directions. Creative people often enjoy the divergence kind of sessions because they're really good at sparking and coming up with things and interacting with other people. And the output of the first divergence session is just a big list of ideas grouped together that you can then explore in the second session, which is a separate session and is a convergence. In the divergence session, there are no bad ideas, and you are after a quantity of ideas and quantity of prior art and things that you want to explore and just things that you want to mention. We are about generating that combinatorial space, about getting a whole lot of things that we can link together. And so no blocking, no saying that idea is not going to work, that idea has already been done. And a really good way I found of making sure that you don't have that blocking and that you have people able to contribute without feeling talked over is to have 5 minutes where everybody uses post-it notes to write down the ideas separately, just without looking at what other people are doing, without any priming, so that they can come up with ideas on their own. And you'll definitely get duplication there, but often you'll get as people, so after the 5 minutes, you go around the table, people introduce the ideas, you put the post-it notes on the wall and try and group them together and try to spark off and look for connections between ideas. As the facilitator, which I presume you're going to be, I really encourage you to say what you like about the ideas as people say them, and try to expand on them a little bit, with saying things like, I really like that idea and that inspired me to think about this, or that kind of thing. So once you've had that divergence session, and I recommend taking a break after that because it can be quite mentally draining, it's time for the convergence session. And this is when it's time to cool things down. Some people have gotten excited about all of the idea space and all of the possibilities. You've got a list of candidate kind of ideas, and it is time to start shutting down the ideas and to try and cull them down to a set of things that you do want to explore further. But even now, it's not time to slam the door on ideas that you know are derivative or unworkable. If an idea has been done, it is a good time to say, I have seen this similar idea in this particular game. I wonder how we could modify what is here to distinguish it from that particular game. How can we avoid that prior art and make something newer? If an idea is impractical, it's a good idea to go, I wonder how we could overcome this particular technical issue, because that can inspire further thought and come up with something new as well. So in the convergence session, again, I recommend 45 minutes or so, and this is a session that engineers will appreciate more than creatives. Creatives will be wanting to continue diverging, whereas engineers are happier shutting things down.
So let's say we've got this set of ideas we've gotten from our divergence session, and we can either group them now, or we could have already grouped them at the end of the divergence session. And then with the grouped ideas, getting people to vote. I recommend giving 3 votes each to each person, and they can spend them how they like. They can either spend them on individual items or on the groups or whatever they want. Then with the ideas that are prioritized by the votes, you can continue to develop them until you have a plan for what you're going to do.
What is the plan to develop this idea further? Allocating time to it, putting it in the backlog. Some might be, well, as it turns out, this is a very exciting area that we didn't anticipate that we might be getting into, but it could really be interesting. We'll need to do further investigation than those. So that can be another outcome that might lead to further divergence and convergence, or just convergence sessions. Perfectly valid outcomes of the convergence session. So you are looking for the ideas that have produced the most excitement, and that things that can be combined. You would expect most of the ideas in this to not be explorable and to fail, and that's okay. But we want to quickly develop even the ones that have sort of passed this initial thing into prototypes, sketches, synopses, and we are still expecting most of those to not be valid contributors to your game, that most of these experiments you want to cut short. If they keep showing promise, then you keep developing them on as long as they need to. But once you realize, no, it's just not going to work with the game, you do want to cut things short as quickly as possible. Now, you may find really good ideas, but those ideas don't fit with the game that you already have. And those ideas are wonderful. You can put them aside. They might be the spark for an entirely new game later. And soon you'll have a backlog of wonderful ideas that you can just pull into any convergence session later on. And maybe that idea will come. Maybe the game will evolve into this idea that gets put aside for the moment. So as a game designer, now I have some working ideas that I've developed and I'm happy with, and I want my game to be deep. So this is the second phase of being cool that we were talking about, so that the game is cool and the game makes lots of money and I don't starve. So how do we make the game deep? It needs to be able to survive scrutiny. all of the things that happen in the game, all of the aesthetics and the choices and the things that do should be done with intention and should be analyzable. Or if not done with intention, if there are random elements that, they should be interpretable at least. It doesn't have to be strict logical kind of reasons. There can be emotional reasons behind the things, of course, and there should be layers of reasons. Individual things should have reasons, but perhaps there are deeper reasons behind those. Event situations, mechanics of the game, and the themes of the game should all interlock together and complement each other. And when you're playing a game like this, you know that the developers have spent more time thinking about it than you have. You can sort of drill deep into it and be confident that the answer to why did this thing happen is a good reason, not just we just needed a foot-high wall so that you couldn't climb over it. Players should be able to discover and realize things well after the game has been released to contribute to the depth. So during your development, this is where you'll be looking for links between function and form, where you'll be asking one question again and again as you're developing the game, all through the brainstorming process, all through the actual the iteration of the process, even getting towards the play testing, maybe a bit late by then. But the big question is why. Examine each element of the game and why is it a part of the game? Why is it there? If you take it out, what happens? Does the game still work without it being there? Then why is it there? If pulling it out doesn't leave an untidy mess of stuff that has been stuck to it, then if it's easily separable, then it probably shouldn't be in the game. So that's one part of it. You should be examining each of the elements of the game to make sure they're essential to it, but also you should be looking at how each element of the game, all of the characters, for example, how they relate to all of the other characters. Do a functional grid of all of the characters and show what does this character feel about this one, and vice versa. How do the characters individually relate to the mechanics in the game? How does the story relate to the characters and the mechanic? How does the aesthetic relate to them? What about the game elements, the items, the levels, the graphics, all of the individual bits of the game? You should be able to ask and to have an answer, even if it's only inside your head. Why was this here? Why was this object in this place? Why did this person do this thing? What about the world in this backstory is going on? So during the process of this, you are building up the lore about the game, L-O-R-E. You have a lot of answers about the game. And what you are trying to do as a game developer with ideas and lore, I want the game to confidently introduce the player into its world so that the game is cool and the game makes lots of money and I don't starve. And we're into the next stage, which is you've got the lore, you've got the ideas, and now you want the game to be confident, by which I mean you should understand your audience and their mindset at each stage of the game. And if the audience is confused, then they should be confused because you made them confused, and you know that they're confused at this point, and that's okay because that's at that point of the game. And if you've made them annoyed about something, you understand that they're going to be annoyed about it. So understanding the audience, you do probably want to try and capture a reasonably large audience, but maybe you're going for a particular psychographic, a particular group of people who you think this game is going to play particularly well with fans of this kind of thing, and maybe there's a good gap there. So you look at all of the player psychographics. There are a number of different ways of analyzing this. I personally like Mark Rosewater's psychographics for Magic the Gathering players. That's Jenny, Timmy, and Spike. And there's Bartol's taxonomy, Achievers, Explorers, Socializers, and Killers, which is essentially the same kind of thing. I'll go with Rosewater here. So the three psychographics are Jenny. They want to show off what they can do. They want to be able to create things. They want to be able to socialize with other people and show off their capabilities in the game. And Minecraft is a big one for this, for example, where you can build all sorts of stuff. But there's certainly the Jennies are also the kind of people who want to show off that they don't just win in a normal way. They can win in unusual ways. They can do all sorts of crazy stuff. Their game is a form of expression about themselves. The Timmy is the experiencer, the person who wants to know all of the things there and have experienced all of it, to be looking at the enormous battle around them and just going, wow. So they want to explore all of the game. They want to see all of the bits. They want to find things that other people haven't seen. So the third psychographic is the spike, and that's the person who wants to win, but more nicely, they're the person who wants mastery of the game. So they are about becoming really good at it and being able to do stuff. So your speedrunners will be a sort of Spike/Jenny combination. So understanding these kind of psychographics, then you start thinking about, what does my game do to appeal to this particular psychographic? And perhaps you don't care about the Jennies. Maybe you don't really care about the players self-expressing, but maybe in something as simple as giving your character design, being able to change the hair color, that's definitely something a Jenny will appreciate. A lot of games are, of course, appealing to spikes and Timmies more readily. The Timmies, you do want to have the exploring options, and they're all about achievements and getting all of the achievements. And the spikes, of course, a lot of games are about combat, and that's very appealing to spikes. But regardless of what proportions, you should be thinking about, how can I appeal to these psychographics? And before you even get to those kind of things, the game needs to teach well. And one very important thing that I think doesn't get quite enough coverage is that the game should show you the goals before it shows you the rules. And this is a mistake that a lot of games make, which is that they will explain the rules to you and what you can do and how you can do it, without explaining why you should be doing it. And it's sometimes such an obvious point that it's easy to forget and easy to skip. But that's part of the mindset of understanding what your audience are thinking at any given time. You don't want them to be confused. You want them to be learning mechanics with a goal in mind. Don't just teach them how to jump when they don't know why they need to jump. The other aspect of this as well is that you do want to show them the goals, so they are motivated to do various things, but then you don't have to hold their hand throughout the entire process. You should be able to reward player agency and leave it for people to come to your game. You don't have to do big info dumps of all of your game lore. All of the wonderful depth of the game is much better if it is discovered by the players who try to seek it out, if they want to, rather than having a voiceover or having people explain it to you in unmissable cutscenes. And that way, the player feels like they are discovering the lore and that they're going to it more. So for me, the way to make a game more confident is to be able to understand at each point what the player is going through. And at some point, there is no substitute for playtesting and for understanding what they're going through by listening to the players and what they are saying about the game, of course. And this is not anything new for a lot of you developing games here. And there's lots of stuff to do with releasing the game. Once you have a game that has the novelty, that has wonderful depth to it, that you've gotten the playtesters to go through so you understand what the players are thinking at every given moment, and maybe some of the moments, that you understand which psychographic you're appealing to, then there's a whole lot of boring stuff to do. It needs professional polish, such as working on different resolutions and aspect ratio, working on all platforms you want to release on, doing playtests with feedback forms and collating that feedback, preparing the icons and the title screen, getting together the achievements for Steam or for Epic or for good old games, writing up your terms of service and your privacy policy. And then there's building buzz. You got to make a killer video, create a press kit, be active on social media such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, your own website, a devlog, a mailing list, and somehow get access to streamers. And then you can just sit back and let the money flow in. All of your effort will have been worth it. So I'm going to change track just for a little here. I would like to teach you how to become a cooler. There's a formative paper from 1952 called On Cooling the Markout by Irving Goffman. And it talks about con artists and the work of the cooler. Now, in every con, there are different roles. There's the people who sort of get the mark involved. There are the people who sort of ride along with them and do all of the things in order to extract the sucker from their money and then leave. The markers, let's assume the mark has been taken for all of their worth, their money has been sucked out of them and they're left there. The cooler is the final role in this whole process. And their job is to cool down the mark. Because the mark at this point, presumably they're still alive and not in jail, is going to be angry. And they're going to want to tell everyone about this horrible con artist mob that took them on. And you don't want that to happen. You don't want them going to the police. You don't want them coming after you with a gun or doing any of these things that might stop your ability to enjoy the fruits of your success. So you employ a cooler. And the cooler hangs around with the mark after they've been taken and cools them down. And this was a well-established and understood thing in con artist stuff in the 1950s, apparently. And the cooler might do things like pretend to be another mark, only they got taken even worse than the original mark. And so the original mark is left in a position of, well, I got taken, but oh my God, this guy got taken so much worse. Oh, poor sucker, And it lets them feel not as bad. And they went, phew, I dodged a bullet there. I lost a bit of money, but I didn't lose it as bad as this guy. The paper goes on to talk about what the psychology of the mark who's been taken and how the cooler makes them feel better. So what is it about the mark that has made them upset, really? It's not losing money, because people lose money all the time and don't feel that bad. They don't feel like committing suicide if you lose a bit of money. It's the shock of the mismatch between what they were expecting to happen and reality. The person had identified with their role. They thought they were being clever. Generally speaking, in a con, it's much easier to take advantage of someone who thinks that they're in on a con, that they're in on something sneaky and taking advantage of something, but they just have to invest this bit of money first. You have to invest money to make money, and then when it fails, they realize, I was not this clever person who's in on the con. I'm the sucker. And it's a huge hit to their ego and their sense of purpose in life. And it's not just in cons that we find this concept happening, the concept where you need a cooler. Anytime a person receives a psychological shock, where there's a mark, say a person has just been made redundant, they had this image of themselves as a competent person in their job, a person who's essential, and now they've been made redundant. That's a huge psychological shock. And companies employ coolers in order to help that person, guide that person through there so that they don't, for the company's own protection, of course, but also, as an act of helping people out. I'd been made redundant, and they definitely employed cooler techniques on me. When I read the paper later, I was like, yeah, okay, I see what you're doing there. And you kind of know it at the time too, of course. Even cases where somebody has been given a shock, like they have been told that they've got a terrible illness, perhaps even a fatal illness, that completely changes them. And so they can use a cooler. Often a priest, when somebody is being told they're going to die, will go through that role of helping the person deal with and adjust to their new circumstances. And there is another circumstance here where a person can receive a psychological shock that's directly relevant to us. We've just released a game and it went onto the Steam store, and perhaps it's not the success that we were hoping for. And we are in a creative endeavor. And we have to ask, how do we get to this point? So we ask successful people all the time how they got to be so successful. And people listen to their wisdom and go, you just have to believe in yourself. Because that's what that successful person believes, and that what they understood. They believed in themselves. They had some modicum of talent. So of course, they had reason to believe in themselves. They weren't deluded, and that was generally speaking enough. That if you believe in yourself and you work hard, then you can get there. But that's survivorship bias going on. And whenever you hear someone who's 100 years old saying, you just have to go to sleep at 9 o'clock every night regularly, you're hearing from the people who did go to sleep at 9 o'clock and live to be 100. You're hearing from the people who did believe in themselves and made a success in the music industry. But you're not hearing from all the people who did exactly the same thing and yet didn't get there. Because when you are the recipient of the survivorship bias and the luck that comes with being a success in a creative endeavor, it's hard to recognize that. And of course you feel you deserve it. You do deserve it if you succeed. But there are plenty of other people who equally deserved it and didn't succeed. There are lots of situations where people have not had the success and earned the money that they wanted to earn in all sorts of creative endeavors. Every university band that you know of had people with hopes and dreams, but in the field of creative endeavors, there is a lot of competition and there is a low success rate. And apart from the few people who make lots of money, most people make no money. And that's in music, art, acting, dance, literature, computer games, board games. Worthy efforts don't always succeed. There is also an element of luck. And that is because all this time I've been defining success wrong. Success is not just financial success. And defining it that way, and it is pervasive, does potential harm. People get caught up in the financial aspect of games that are unlikely to make a lot of money, which I think does them wrong. These people need a cooler. So, as a cooler, recognize and demonstrate that there are other metrics for success. Alternative metrics. It was a valuable experience. It was fun. I made something new, deep, and confident that I'm proud of. I got to work with great people. It helped me get a job in an industry that I love. I get to show my friends a cool thing. It was enjoyed, no, obsessed over by a few people, but those people loved it very much. There's a metric that I call the Shellshare metric that is a personal thing that I define for my own standard of success, which I think might help. And that is, if people spent more time enjoying it than you did creating it, well, that's one measure of success. In a creative industry, I feel it is a mistake to tie your creative fulfillment, your self-actualization, to not starving. Do it because you love it. Do it because you get great satisfaction from creating something new and wonderful. Get a job in the game industry if you can, so that you don't have to risk your own money. And if you can't, and you must, then do it on the side while you work a job that pays the bills. As a game designer, I want to make a cool game so that I will be proud of it and be happy. Thank you.
Wow, that was something. We've got Bilal applauding, and I second that. Now, if anyone has any questions, please pop them into the chat so that we can pass them on to Andrew. No, this one is real, Bilal. We've taken whichever pill it is that gets you out of the Matrix, and we are now back in the real world. See, he wouldn't be able to say hello to everyone if this wasn't the real world. We've got Alex applauding. We've got Luke saying that was brilliant, and it was. Brett saying very nice. So have a think of some questions, gang. In the meantime, Andrew, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you posited, that a game that will be thought about over the years and all this sort of stuff. What games have you thought about over the years? Which games have influenced you and made you think this is what I want to do?
Honestly, there's some eternal ones. I love puzzle games, and there's a really formative one called Soccerban that just had such beautiful, elegant mechanics. It's just such a tiny game, such a tiny system, and you can generate these enormous things from it. Similarly, there was an early game from the Commodore 64 called Lode Runner. That
Yeah.
I think about all the time. So, and that had its own level designer attached to it, and that was really neat. It was the first game I ever saw where you could design your own levels, and of course that I've definitely got Jenny kind of um, stuff going on. So I designed any number of levels were very intricate and required you to do this and this and then this, and you can turn what is an action game into a strict puzzle game because all of the elements on the game were moving sort of procedurally. Uh, then yeah, so I think that those kind of games, the ones where you're able to design your own levels. There was another one called Boulder Dash as well that had a very similar kind of thing. It was really clever, and once again you could design your own levels, and just that whole ability to design your own levels in Lode Runner and in Boulder Dash got me designing game stuff from a
Hmm.
very early age when I was 10 or so, and back in 1980, 80 or 83 or something, and kind of set me on the path that I ended up. That went on to programming on the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64 in BASIC, and then that led to a eventual career in computer programming, and now I'm with games which I never thought would be possible.
There's probably a lot of people out there right now going, VIC-20, Commodore 64. What are those? What's he talking about? It's okay. I remember those as well. We've got a question from Bilal. How do you balance the endless chain of why when working on increasing depth with actually working on the game? I find the never ending whys kind of overwhelming.
Mm, yeah, yeah. So I, what was I was having a discussion today about with you, Paul, about uh, creative endeavors are never finished; they're only
Hmm.
abandoned. Uh, and yeah, you've essentially got to get yourself a convergence session happening and go start closing things off and go, okay, so um, I have answered enough questions for there to be enough depth, but identifying that depth depends on the game and the system that you want. So yeah, I guess it does require an amount of self-analysis to go, how deep is it at the moment? Getting player feedback, and you should be able to point to things that people get excited about and go, I went through this game. I found this thing, and you need at least three of those. You need 3 points in the game where people get excited because they discovered something for themselves that might not have occurred to them. And different people have different things, so you need
Hmm.
a whole bunch, maybe 10 or 20 individual exciting moments that can be discovered through depth. But you don't need to do any more than that. And I'd argue, if you're getting people discovering too much, then it does become overwhelming for them as well as for you. So I would say in playtests, if you get people excited about 3 things that they discovered for themselves, 3 bits of depth, then that's great, because 3 is essentially infinity.
Jack asks, do you think the final game quality would be better or worse if we stopped thinking about not starving and focused more on the creativity goals that you mentioned?
I think you can't make a game properly if you're going to concentrate on not starving, because you'll start pushing too early for monetization and making it into a money spinner, which is not going to end up in a game that is aesthetically rewarding for you or for anyone really. I'm hard against all of the monetization efforts that are going on at the moment in mobile. I think they're kind of horrible. But people on an individual basis, when you're designing your own things, you can get deep satisfaction out of making a cool game that I don't think you get as much satisfaction out of making a game that sucks money out of people. That feels kind of dirty. But of course, when you're part of a company, you're part of the company has to make money somehow. And the thing is, it's very different when you're working on it personally from when you're working for a company, because when you're working on something personally and you're spending your own money, you can't afford a failure. Whereas a company generally can go, okay, this one didn't do so great, this one didn't do so great. Here's the success that we were looking for. We were, that you get a couple of attempts at it. There are companies that make a lot of attempts at it. I was reading about one in GDC just the other day. They made like 9 or 10 games that had a small amount of success, barely enough to pay people, and then they got their big breakthrough kind of thing. But the important thing there is that you just don't risk your own money.
Yep. No one wants to starve or be reduced to eating nothing but instant ramen every evening.
Yes, that's right. It's not a good incentive.
No. Hamid, I used to draw Sonic and Mario levels back in the 90s.
Nice.
Respect. And Brett Daniels, I remember a game called Glider about a paper airplane making its way through an office space. Came with a level design capability, can definitely relate as it being inspirational.
That was so cool, that game. I only had a pirated version of that game. So, I think it was bugged at some point, maybe deliberately.
Oh, Bilal can no longer avoid baby Judy. He will try and join us in Discord if people are still around. Thanks for the great talk.
No worries.
So a question which I had, so I've seen games that you've been involved with through Hack Ops. So for those who don't know, Hack Ops is something we do in Wargaming Sydney, where the teams break off into small teams and they come up with a project, and we have 3 days. It's basically our internal game jam. Now the games that you've been involved with and the ones that have been your ideas, and I'm obviously thinking of your most recent one, they've been cool. So which came first? Was it this'll be cool, or this is a good mechanic, or what was your thought process? Because they did end up being very cool games.
They build up over time. Each of them comes from a cool seed, and then I think I was talking with Bilal the other day, and he was going, "My God, you really are into self-reference and recursion, aren't you?" And I was going, "Yes, I am 100% down with this particular thing happening." And then you realize that on a much larger scale, the whole the game loop is repeated on a meta scale, and the story is also doing the same thing, and that's the kind of thing that gives me great satisfaction. So often the cool initial idea, I then try and spin out into, can I apply this at a different level? I can.
Excellent. So if anyone hasn't seen it, Andrew did a talk, it was late last year, about a game which him and part of the team made for one of our last Hack Ops, which was inspired by Tenet. and I still can't even watch the video of the game playing without my brain starting to hurt. Um, how on
Yeah, it was hard to
earth,
make as well.
like something like that? Where does I mean, obviously the inspiration is you've got this happening in the movie,
Yeah.
but how do you break that down to put that into a game?
Um, I the impetus for that particular one came from us talking about replays, and there was someone joining a replay team, and I was going, oh, that I wonder what other things you could use replays for other than just replaying. What if you replayed it backwards? What would that happen? Oh, you'd have a Tenet kind of situation if you did a game replay backwards. But what if you had some people just doing regular stuff in the context of a game replay happening backwards? Uh, oh yeah, that's really Tenet kind of stuff going on there. Okay, but how would that work logically? And then just trying to I always view the creative process as a discovery process, not an inventing kind of process. That I'm discovering something that's just there, carving away the bits, revealing. Oh, and it's a wonderful process of discovery where you're just kind of going, that was there all along. The whole principle of going forwards and backwards in time simultaneously, um, and going, well, if you are traveling forwards in time and you see someone going backwards in time, then you're going to have to be that person eventually. So if you do see someone, how am I going to do that? And of course, then you try and brainstorm. That's when I sort of entered a brainstorming kind of thing and just went, how could I enforce that? How could I do that without it being lame? And I went, oh yeah, okay, DDR, DDR. So it's like when you're traveling backwards and you have to do exactly the kind of things that you saw happening, then that's an easy mechanic there. And then so the kind of things where you go, you make yourself a constraint, and then you go, how would I do that? What would make that work in an interesting kind of way? And then you brainstorm on that and try different mechanics, and then find the one that fits aesthetically and properly with the game. My God, it took a lot of explaining and organizing to get that just together in my own head, let alone explain it to
I
other
can
people.
imagine. I still, like I say, I still watch it and go, yeah, my brain's just hurting now. And,
Mm.
as great as you are at explaining it, and I never thought I'd hear Dance Dance Revolution and Tenant being used in the same sentence. Um, it's still,
It's a brand new sentence.
every time I watch, exactly, it's one of your brand new sentences. So I don't see any other new questions that have come into the chat. So there's just one other question that I wanted to ask you actually, and you talked about during the initial process to not throw away ideas like okay, look, this is already used in that game, so we can't use that. You take it and you see maybe how you can change it, or ideas which didn't work in a game and how can you make it work. Do you have any examples, of something that maybe you saw in a game which you thought, look, that's a really cool idea, but it didn't work in this game. But when we're doing this project, if we did X, Y, and Z to it, I think it would be really cool.
So the one that leaps to mind is the Tenet kind of thing where I had unshooting of and it's so you see essentially you see the pieces of a block, and it starts piecing together and reforming itself, and you have to unshoot it at that moment, so that
Mm.
you pull a bullet from it out of the block, the cause you because this thing is happening backwards. It pulls back out and unexplodes, so that becomes a rhythm shooter where you got to point and shoot at the particular thing at the particular time. And I played many different versions of that kind of game, uh, and not regarded as particularly exciting. But there was just something about, yes, we're using an
Mm.
existing mechanic, but it's different enough here because it's applied to something that's visually appealing. It's coming together, and you're uncausing it, which is a unique kind of take on a very old mechanic.
Yeah.
That's one that leaps to mind.
So I think we might. I'm just checking the chat. Yep, there's no other questions in the chat. So I think we might bring things to a close. We will be heading over to the Games with Wings Discord for a while, so if anyone does have any other questions that they want to ask Andrew, you'll be able to go there, and myself and Andrew will be there. That link is in the chat in YouTube as we speak. Thank you very much again, Andrew. Really appreciate you taking the time out to present to us tonight. The Sydney Game Developers Meetup will be back at the end of this month. We do have our next talk lined up, and we'll be sending out, if you've already joined our meetup page, you'll get an alert for that at the start of next week. If not, maybe head over or subscribe to our YouTube channel here. You'll also get the notification when we schedule that in. And if you did enjoy tonight's talk, maybe give it a like so that we know that you enjoyed it. As I say, subscribe and all that other YouTube stuff, share it on Twitter and do whatever else you want to do so that other people get to see this wonderful video. Thank you very much, everyone. I will see you over in Discord very shortly. Bye.
Bye.